Hi, I'm Catherine Robson, the founder of Affinity Private Advisors. One of the questions we often get asked is, what's the value of good quality advice? It's often hard to quantify. So that's why we were delighted when we had the opportunity to sit down with the CEO of Russell Investments Australia, Jodie Hampshire, recently, and talk through the report that they've just released, trying to quantify just that. The framework that they've developed suggests that 4.4% per annum is added to investor portfolios through the intervention of a relationship with a quality financial advisor. But what that doesn't take into consideration is the impact of some of the things that you can't quantify. And Jodie shares a very personal experience about the planning outcomes that were instrumental for her and her family when she went through cancer several years ago. We hope you enjoy the interview with Jodie, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Welcome to Success Stories, the podcast where outstanding women share their journey to leadership, the personal habits that have helped them succeed, and the projects they're passionate about. Join me, your host, Catherine Robson, as we redefine what success looks like. Jodie Hampshire's superpower is being truly interested in people, but not caring too much about what they think of her. Perhaps this was the result of growing up in a very small country town, or having adopted 3 children from war-torn Sierra Leone, or having survived breast cancer. But wherever it comes from, it's propelled her to the most senior heights of investment management. Having worked across the globe, Jodie is now the Managing Director of Russell Investments Australia, who manage over $30 billion here. She's also a member of the Russell Global Council, which has an important oversight role of the $3.3 trillion the firm has under advisement globally. Jodie's used to being a high achiever, from her time studying commerce at the University of Newcastle to being one of the very few to sail straight through the notoriously gruelling Chartered Financial Analyst program. But after years of prolific output, she now understands that it's her ability to be reflective and creatively join the dots that enable her to create profound value for an organisation. Jodie, nice to meet you.
Thank you, lovely to be here.
So you're the most senior person at Russell Investments here in Australia. Can you tell us a bit about what Russell is and what your job entails?
Sure. Russell Investments is a global asset manager. We've got a long history. We've been around for many, many years. We used to be called Frank Russell. So we started in Tacoma, which is near Seattle, in the northwest of the US. We actually invented a lot of the things that are considered standard fare in investment management today. So manager research is something that we invented.
So manager research is you've got people who are employed to look at investment managers and say, are they doing what they really say they're doing?
Correct.
And should our clients use them?
That's right.
Yep.
Before manager research became a thing, people would choose investment managers based on who their golfing buddies were. So we professionalised it, made it a career for people, and it's one of the things that we're still very proud of today. We scour the world for the best investment managers, combine them sensibly into multi-manager, multi-asset portfolios. We run some money ourselves now. So another thing we invented was the idea of factors. So in Australia, we started the value and growth indices a long time ago.
And so they're sort of style criteria.
Correct.
So the way an investment manager manages things, whether they're focusing on companies that are likely to have a high level of growth and therefore happy to pay more.
That's right.
Or looking at companies that maybe the market doesn't really understand or value, and so you get it at a cheaper price.
That's right. And we do a lot of research into those sorts of stocks and characteristics and form views about which ones are going to perform well in different markets. So that's something we've done for a long time and introduced to the investment landscape. Even something like asset consulting. So this is the idea where an institution will work with an advisor to come up with what is the right asset allocation. So how much of my money as an institution should be in shares and property, how much should be in bonds and cash, we started that industry as well. So we've got a long and proud history of innovation, and we're continuing to do it today. And I think that's one of the exciting things about my job, is that I get to be part of a team that's thinking about what do we do next? How can we help improve financial security for more people? How can we do it better? How can we take costs out of the system? And it's a really interesting part of the investment landscape.
Well, and you sort of touch almost all parts of investments, at least in Australia. So you're
Yes,
right
we
from
do.
individuals via their advisors, superannuation funds come and seek your advice and counsel, not-for-profit organisations will employ you to manage some of their money. So it seems like, there's not really any part of the Australian investment landscape that Russell's not somehow involved in.
I think that's right. And even direct investors, so people that are using stockbrokers and buying ETFs. We have a range of ETFs that are available. So yeah, we do work with mums and dads through their advisors through to multi-billion-dollar superannuation funds. One of the groups of clients that I'm quite proud to have brought on and people always find quite interesting is cemeteries trusts. So cemeteries trusts have pools of money that they need to invest to grow indefinitely because they need someone mowing the lawn at the cemetery for decades to come. So a lot of people don't even know that they're a class of investment management clients, but they're great fun, really great people.
The financial services industry has had a bit of a come to Jesus moment in Australia with the Royal Commission, and superannuation funds and others have come in for some criticism, but I think no one more than advisors. So it was fascinating that Russell published its second annual investigation into the value that advisors add. Can you talk a bit about what your findings were in that report?
Yeah, sure can. So, I mean, you're right, Catherine. The reported trust level in advisors has declined enormously post-Royal Commission, and I think that's really unfortunate because yes, some shoddy practices were unearthed, but the reality is that most advisors are good quality advisors that are trying to improve financial outcomes for their clients and are passionate about that. We work with great advisors across the country, and we wanted to kind of come out fighting in the advisor's corner because...
So just on that question of quality, so just in terms of the report, what was the cutoff or assessment that you made of quality, and then did you make an assessment of what proportion of practicing advisors in Australia fit into that quality bucket?
No, we didn't. But I think when I described the pieces of the report, I would conclude at the end that a quality advisor is someone that's doing all of these things for you. So quality advice I would describe as something that's more holistic. Sometimes people think that advice is about getting an investment portfolio and that's it. And that's like a tiny part of the puzzle. There's so much more that it's getting the investment portfolio, it's keeping the investment portfolio right, and a whole bunch of other things which I can explain in a moment if you would like. But we have produced this report in the US and Canada for 5 or 6 years, and it goes down really well there. And so we did it. We did a light version of the report last year, and as we went through the Royal Commission last year and we knew that we had this information available, we said, this is a really great time to come out. We've done a full press launch for the report. We've got great coverage. We've been going out to advisor professional development days, and it's so lovely to see advisors in the room who have spent the morning talking about Royal Commissions and compliance and all of those difficult things, have us come and speak about, well, this is like what an independent party sees as the value that you're bringing to your clients. And seeing the advisors' eyes light up and remember what it is that they love about their job, and they're all nodding and going, yes, that's what we do. And it's been quite restorative, I think, excuse me, for advisors to hear that message from someone. We're not an advice firm. We're successful if our advice partners are successful, but we're just telling it like we see it.
So one of the things I loved about the report is it sort of simplifies down into almost an equation. Mm-hmm. So can you talk us through that 5 elements that the report identifies that really adds tangible value to investors?
Yep. So we concluded through the report that the combination of 5 factors add up to, at a starting point, 4.4% per annum in terms
before advisor fees.
Before advisor fees.
Yes.
So 4.4% per annum over a lifetime relationship adds up to a lot for the average Australian. So if you start with an advisor when you're 40, say, with a modest amount of savings, that can end up adding $550,000 to your retirement balance, for example, or to how much you've got in your later years. So that's a difference between private and public healthcare, between going overseas for holidays, between how many holidays you can have. Like that's a really meaningful number when it's compounded annually, and it doesn't come predictably year in, year out. Like there are a lot of, as your life changes, the value of advice can increase and decrease depending on where you're at, but that's what we think is on average the number. So the way we came up with the number is this catchy little formula we call ABCPT. Do you want me to go through and explain?
Yeah, I think they're really, really perceptive, and also just the where the value sits. And some parts, the 4.4 is the quantifiable value, but there's some elements of that ABCPT that you can't put a number on, which I think is really interesting. So I'll let you explain it.
I'll take you through it. So ABCPT, A stands for annual rebalancing. So if an individual is left to their own devices, they might set up an investment portfolio and have a particular exposure to growth assets or the shares, the risky assets, shares and property, and some to cash and bonds. They might set it up thinking that matches their risk profile, and then they won't touch it. And if you leave a portfolio unbalanced over a period of time, depending on whether markets go up or down, you end up with a much riskier portfolio or a much less risky portfolio. Then it's not doing what it says on the tin. So advisors will rebalance an investor's portfolio at least annually and keep it true to label and true to their risk profile.
Or presumably reassess whether the benchmark's actually appropriate anymore. So
Correct.
If you start with an advisor at 40, you might be more inclined to have more growth assets in your target asset allocation, but by the time you get to 65 it might be different, and you've got someone who prompts not only what does it look like relative to the target, but is the target still right?
How can I change it? And that's actually the C. So I'll come into that one a little bit more. So A is just rebalancing sort of what you've agreed your portfolio is. We don't put a number on that. In the US, we say it's worth about 10 to 20 basis points. Here we've just said variable, 0.1 to 0.2% per annum.
Yep.
So smaller number relative to the others. So we think it's worth something, but we didn't put a number on it for the purpose of our Australian report. The second one is the largest component, and that's avoiding behavioural mistakes. So advisors obviously don't control markets. Russell Investments doesn't control markets, but advisors can coach their clients and save them from the behavioural biases that we all have as humans. So there are over 200 behavioural biases that have been identified, and some of the top ones people would know familiarity. So most people will have a lot greater exposure to Australian shares because they know the companies, they see them on they see them on shop fronts when they're going down the street. So that sense of familiarity makes you think that you understand the stock better, perhaps, and to invest in those. So familiarity is one. Mental accounting is another. So sometimes you might think about a loss or a gain differently depending on where you got the money from to start with.
So that sort of, it was a small inheritance. I was never expecting it anyway.
Yes.
So I
don't mind.
I put it on something that was super high risk and I lost it also, but I don't care because I never expected it anyway, as compared to this is $10,000 of savings that I've been working over the last 4 years to accumulate. And if I lost that, I'd be devastated.
Still $10,000 in both cases, for example. But we as humans will attach different importance to those two things, even though from a financial perspective, they're exactly the same. So an advisor will coach you through that kind of thing. One of the particular behavioural biases we see a lot is herding, which I affectionately call FOMO. So fear of missing out. And one of our strategists, I don't know if he invented the word, but he certainly uses it, FONGO, fear of not getting out. So this is the idea. You're at a barbecue and everyone's telling you that they're buying, Appen and Afterpay, these tech stocks, and they're just skyrocketing, and people think, I'm missing out on something here, so I need to get on that train. And they buy in when the price is high. And generally then as the price starts to decline, they'll start to sell. So the worst thing you can do in investment is to buy high and sell low, and that's what an advisor will counsel you against. So when we what we do to try and come up with the value of a behavioural coach, we come up with almost 2%, and that's just from looking at one of them. So this herding or fear of missing out effect. So we use US data because it's quite hard to get a really good fund flow data in Australia. But if we just look at the benchmark, so say the Russell 3000, which is a broad US equity market benchmark, look at the performance of that benchmark over a long time period, and then look at the performance of the average retail investor by looking at when they're buying and selling ETFs and funds based on that benchmark. The average retail investor does almost 2% worse than if they just bought the index and held it over a long time period.
So the fact that they're buying in and out
at the wrong time,
it's about 1.9%
Correct.
is the estimate of how much value they're losing by behaving that way, and an advisor's intervention hopefully moderates
some
that.
of that.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's just one of the 200. That's one of the ones we see most commonly, and that's one of the ones that can have the biggest impact, but that's just one. So we think the possibilities to save people from themselves are really huge. So that's B. So we've got A and B. C, you started to talk about before. So that's the cost of getting it wrong. So we know from research, like there's some Deloitte research that says something like over 80% of under 35-year-olds want a capital stable return. That is really, really wrong from an investment perspective, because they've got, if it's like, say, a superannuation account, they've got years and years and years and years. So they should be exposed to growth markets from an investment perspective. So an advisor can coach an individual to say, you're 35, you need to take more risk, it's going to be okay, you've got time, don't worry, and to coach them through perhaps undershooting from a risk perspective where they should be. And on the reverse, sometimes you get older people that are risk-seeking when they perhaps shouldn't be anymore.
Or risk-seeking and they don't know it.
Yes.
So that you know, I've often seen investors come in at a mature age in their 80s and they go, I've got a diversified portfolio, I've got all 4 of the banks and BHP.
Oh, gosh.
And you know, like, mostly, if they've held those stocks for a long time, yes, they've done very well, but they're taking an enormous amount of risk and they probably don't realise it.
Yeah, at 80, that's the time when you're starting to reduce exposure to those kind of assets, absolutely.
So the next two are P and T. Can you talk about T first and then P last?
Yes. So T is tax. A good advisor is up to date with superannuation tax laws in particular. Most of us worry about understanding superannuation tax. It changes regularly. I'm in the industry and I still forget where it is and need to ask somebody and ask an advisor at times what I should be doing. So someone who's not in the industry at all, has Buckley's chance of keeping up with superannuation tax. People are nervous of falling foul of the ATO as well. So we think that getting good advice around superannuation contributions, tax-effective strategies for investment, tax-effective transition to retirement strategies, all of that can add up to between 0.9% and 1.2%, depending on which phase you're at in terms of your particular tax status, and keep you out of, keep you from worrying about doing the wrong thing from a tax perspective.
So the last one is P. What's P?
P is probably my favourite one. So we spoke before about a good advisor being more than just investment management, and P really is around planning. And this is the holistic wealth management partnership that an advisor will have with their clients. So a good advisor will be making sure that they are asking the right questions to really get to understand the particular goals of their client, their family circumstances, what risks they have, what risk tolerances they have, getting huge amounts of information and advice and good conversations to understand where it is that they're trying to go. It's not just about an investment portfolio, it's about insurance, it's about saving for education, it's about aged care for parents, it's about all of those I was going to say ancillary, but they're so not ancillary, but all of the other things that together form a wealth, a wealth management strategy for a family.
Or the reason why you want the wealth in the first place, almost.
Yes.
It's about the things that are most important in life. Do you have a personal insight into the power of P?
Yes, I do. And I think everybody will have a story like this. I've probably got two. One is I had an advisor that I was working with a few years ago, and she and I went through and did all of our insurances because I have 4 children and I wasn't across my insurances. So we sat down and did it all. And a few years later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I was going through all of that, and she contacted me and said, you have trauma insurance, remember? And I didn't remember and said, oh, can I claim that? And she said, yes, this is exactly what it's for. So I was able to claim on my trauma insurance, and it gave me quite a bit of peace of mind. I didn't, when you're starting out cancer treatment, because I was young, I was having the full barrage of chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, everything, and you don't know if you're going to be well. You've really got no idea. I actually went through it all quite well and was able to work, and Russell was very supportive as well. But not having to worry about money was such a weight off my mind at that point in time. So, and I think lots of people will have an insurance story where something's really made a difference to somebody, and it's on the advice of an advisor that they've gone out and gotten this insurance. Another one is my advisor has been harassing me to do my will. So again, I have 4 children. I now have a grandchild, and I have embarrassingly not had a will until this year. And we travel all over the world doing crazy things, and it was probably not a good idea. So anyway, he kept harassing me to do my will, and eventually just booked a meeting, came to my office with the lawyer, and we got the will done. But I honestly wouldn't have done it if he didn't keep at me to do that. And he knew it was just a time issue. It was I wanted to do it, I just never got the time.
Well, and that being time poor, lots of us say that about ourselves, but thinking about your life, I don't know if there's many people who are more time poor than you are. So you've got 4 kids. Mm-hmm. 3 of them were born in Sierra Leone, yes. And you're an adoptive parent. And you and some collaborators wrote a book about a sort of a guidebook to what it's like to be a parent of children that have gone through sometimes enormous amounts of trauma before they've found their forever family. Mm-hmm. What has been the experience of living through that?
I was actually just talking to a colleague about this an hour ago. So I've been a parent to my adopted children for 12 years, and it has been quite the journey.
Can you talk a little bit about how you came to be an adoptive parent?
Yeah. So I remember distinctly a weekend before, a few months before my husband and I got married, we spoke to each other and said that we wanted to adopt. So it was a choice. We always had wanted to adopt. My husband, Robert, had grown up in a family with a lot of foster children coming through his home. So to him, it was very normal to have this kind of family arrangement. So we'd had this dream to adopt, but then we were living overseas in London and working in London. Then we moved to Dubai, and I'd put that dream to bed because the Australian system is difficult, and we were, he's a bit older than me, so I thought we'd be aged out by the time we got home. Then we were in Dubai, and I was reading the local newspaper one day, and on the front cover was a picture of a single man with 4 children from Sierra Leone, and I sort of had this light bulb moment of, oh, wow, I think maybe we can adopt in Dubai, and I hadn't realised that. So, fast forward a few months later, we had our first child. So the process was in that particular case very, very quick. The next 2 children took a year longer, but it had always been a dream to adopt, and we didn't think we were going to be able to. So we were very felt very grateful that we were able to do that as expats.
And so you talk about going on a journey, and in so Lionheart is the guidebook that you and your colleagues have written, and you're sort of called out as a bit of an expert on therapeutic parenting, and also kids who've suffered post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit about how you've developed those skills? And I think all of us feel like as parents it's hard enough, but having that extra layer of complexity, how you actually manage it.
I think we wrote the book because we were pretty clueless at the start. So we had done all of the counselling, educated people. We read lots of books. This idea of trauma is a relatively new thing from a neuroscience perspective. It's probably been only spoken about for maybe the last 10 years properly. So when we were doing our training 12, 13 years ago, people talked about attachment and getting attached to the kids. I don't even remember ever talking about trauma. So I think back to some of the ways we responded to our children in their early years, and I almost shudder because I'm like, oh gosh, if I knew then what I knew now. So we wrote the book to try and help other parents in our position to say, like, we've learnt this the hard way. Please read this book so you can learn the easy way. But also the resources around trauma are, I was going to say the resources are better now, but still I think the average person's understanding of trauma in the community at large is very, very poor. And trauma is not just, any adopted child has been through trauma, the trauma of not being able to live with their birth family, whatever's happened. But there's trauma all around us. If you think of the naughty kid at school, I guarantee that there's some kind of trauma going on there. So I think even if you're not an adoptive parent, having some understanding of trauma and how that manifests and changing from thinking, oh my gosh, what is wrong with you, to, oh, what's happened to you, is a really helpful thing to do in the world at large.
Therapeutic parenting, I reckon I could use some tips on that.
Therapeutic parenting it's really, gosh, how do I describe therapeutic parenting? It's using things like natural consequences, so as a parent, we always want our children to not feel pain and to do things for them. Therapeutic parenting is around trying to understand why our child is behaving in a particular way and responding to try and meet that need. It includes very, natural consequences, which are sometimes really hard to give to your kids because it can be things like, they don't put a jumper on to go outside and you've told them that they're cold, and our natural tendency is to want to go and chase after them and give it to them. And you just learn to teach the kids the consequences of their actions. That's something I think that you can apply to any children. Therapeutic parenting has a lot more additional things. So a lot of children that have had trauma have sensory issues. So it can be things around more occupational therapy based ways to play with kids. I have a story in the book where my husband, when my son was having a hard few years, my husband used to wrestle with him before he went to bed. And at the start, I thought that's not the right thing to do when you're trying to calm down to go to sleep. But my son really needed the sensory pressure and input from that wrestling, and that calmed his nervous system down enormously. So understanding what's going on in the brain through their trauma and then adjusting your parenting to respond to that is therapeutic parenting in a nutshell. It's really hard to do because it's like can feel like a full-time job, and sometimes you've got other jobs as well. It's hard work, but it's worth the effort because the kids get further faster.
I'm sure Sierra Leone is a place that's very special for your family, given that it's the birthplace of 3 of your kids, and you've been a prolific fundraiser. So the Do It in a Dress initiative, and raising money for organisations that particularly, I think, support education for girls. Can you talk a little bit about, obviously, how that relates to your experience of the world?
When we were writing the book, we really wanted to make sure that we were doing something good for adoptive families like us and doing something good for our children's birth countries. And I did partner with my husband contributed to the book, and so did 2 of my closest friends. We wanted to think about education for girls, and there are a lot of statistics around the impact that educating girls makes to the wider community. So there are lots of things on the website of One Girl, which is an Australian charity. So I didn't want to set up my own charity. A lot of people do that. That wasn't for me. I wanted to give money to a charity that already had the structures and governance processes and was running things properly from my perspective. So we funded a sanitation block, so basically a toilet block in a school in northern rural Sierra Leone. Typically what happens is when girls start to menstruate in Sierra Leone, they stop going to school because they don't have sanitary products, they don't have toilets to change sanitary products, and they just end up staying home. And that is problematic for their education and their future, earning potential, for the number of children they have. Like the impact is enormous.
Yeah, the statistics are incredible in terms of each additional year of education for a girl.
Does this for their income, this to the number of children they have, this to the family income. Literally keeping a girl in school for another year is transformative for a family and for a community. So we really wanted to be part of that. So last year we funded the building of this sanitation block. They're building it at the moment. Hopefully one day I'll go and see it. We originally sort of thought, it'd be great to like build a school or do something like that. But because we partnered with One Girl, they were able to say, if you build a school, the government won't. And actually the best thing you can do to keep a girl in school sensibly is to build the toilet block. And the community is allowed to use the toilet block. Like there are a whole bunch of sanitation, hygiene, training that gets done in that community, and it has improved health outcomes for everybody. So we were really excited by that. I really like One Girl. As long as I can afford to, I will keep supporting them any way that I can. I think they do fabulous work.
You've said that writing the book was the cheapest therapy ever.
It was.
But then you also have been very generous in terms of writing of your experience of suffering cancer and going through the chemotherapy treatment. And one of the things that really struck me was saying, I just wanted to tell people to piss off when they told me I was brave. And I suppose, my question is, so many of us find ourselves up close to cancer and have people in our lives that we would love to help more, encourage more because they're going through a very difficult time. What is the best thing to say?
Probably, gosh, this really sucks. The language around cancer is a really interesting thing. So when you get told that you're really brave a lot, it is kind of annoying because if you're diagnosed with cancer, you have two options. You fight it any way you can, or you curl up and don't do anything. So, most people, particularly with the sort of early stage cancer that I had, most people choose the first option. I was young, children, lots of life ahead, hopefully. So you get up and fight. But I didn't choose to get cancer. So I didn't volunteer, so I don't really think of myself as brave.
You weren't running into a burning building to save kittens.
No, I just dealt with
happened.
what life threw. I just had to deal with what life threw me. And I think the language around, such and such died after a battle with cancer, it sort of implies they didn't fight hard enough. Like there's just some really emotional language around cancer that I would encourage us not to use. But I think be really human with people when they get cancer and say, this really sucks. How can I help you? And sometimes you get a lot... you get that thing of, if I can ever do anything to help, let me know. And that puts all the mental load back onto the patient. So be more practical and say, I'm going to bring you dinner over on Friday. Are you okay with chicken? Like literally be super practical.
And are there any things that people did do in that practical domain that you thought, that's the best idea, I've got to park that for next time someone needs help?
One of my best friends is an absolute darling. She's extremely thoughtful. She has plenty of her own challenges in life, and she had two of her closest friends, me and another lady, going through cancer treatment a week or two apart from each other in terms of staging. So I remember going to the park with her and our kids, and she said, Emma's got cancer, and I was really sad. And 2 weeks later I had cancer. So she was just a darling. So she would bring a present for both of us. She would deliver it to my office for every chemotherapy cycle that we did, because the chemotherapy cycles are the big deals because they're the most intense of anything that you're doing. And every one, so I did 6, I think. Every one is like an achievement that you've gotten through. So she would bring a present for both of us. And it was something like, it was something that would be helpful to us in what we were going through. And
so after every cycle, it was almost like a celebration.
Yes, a celebration of everyone.
Yeah.
So that was quite lovely. She was very, very thoughtful, but people were very sweet to me. It was kind of strange. I remember the day I was leaving work to go and start the chemotherapy, and it was like I died. People didn't know what to say and were a bit awkward.
Looking at the ground as you went
it was
past.
sort of this really somber day. So I think the more that we can, and people were just kind and caring, right? I would probably be exactly the same. So to the extent people can normalise it for people around them and just say, it sucks.
It sucks and good luck. And
it sucks. How, I'm going to bring you dinner.
Yeah. So one of the things you talked about in the whole process of chemo is just the impact on your cognitive function. So beyond the bodily impact of feeling nauseous or whatever,
Yes.
that brain fog, when you're used to being a high performer, I can't imagine how hard it would be to just try and get back to normal working the way you used to when you have that sort of bandwidth drain. I can't believe that you worked basically through it and that you've gone on to progress to the most senior job in a very big organisation. How did you do that?
Well, when I was having the treatment, I was actually really good because I was taking steroids and they make you superhuman. So I remember my colleagues and my team knew that I was going for chemo on, like, say, a Thursday or even a Friday morning, and Friday afternoon I'm bashing out emails and ringing them, and they're surprised and saying, "Aren't you supposed to be resting?" I said, "No, I've got so much energy, I don't know what to do." But then it comes off and you go through a week or two of much less energy. So the cognitive function, I think that was probably one of the biggest effects for me, because I can remember standing, I'd be speaking with a colleague and I would just completely forget what I was saying. I think that my cognitive function is certainly better than it was, because it's now, it's 5 years since I went through treatment, but it actually isn't. I blame the cancer, but it might actually be 5 years and I'm a little bit older.
Just ageing generally.
I think it could just be ageing generally, but I blame the cancer. When I forget stuff still, I pull the cancer card and say, I had a lot of chemotherapy, I can't remember. So I use it to my advantage, but I actually don't think I've got the full memory in particular back that I had. And you just find ways to work around it. Like, I'd take a lot more lists. I have lots of people in my team who have really great memories. I'll ask them. They'll be able to tell me what I said on the 12th of October 2016, whereas I wouldn't even know where I was.
So in terms of managing people, obviously it's difficult to do that when you've got some other challenges, health and family and other things. But one of the things that I liked, about you is that you've sort of put your hand up to say that you can navigate personalities. And I think that's one of the things, the more senior you get in your career, the more you are responsible for achieving outcomes you desire through influencing people to do their best work. So how have you learned, or is it innate, to be able to navigate personalities?
I think it's a little bit of both. So I think that I'm very interested in people and I like to understand how they tick, and I find it quite easy to get on with people. I think part of the reason for that is I grew up in a tiny country town. And
near Newcastle?
No, near Cooma and Canberra.
Oh, cold.
Yeah. So in the snowy, near the snowy mountains.
There was a guy that I went to uni with who grew up in Cooma, and we went to uni together in Canberra, and he wore shorts every day.
Oh, wow.
Because it was like, Canberra's not cold compared to Cooma.
Yeah, I was the opposite. I was like, where can I go to university that's really far away and much further north? So I grew up in this very small town where you just, you deal with everybody and you interact with everybody. And I think that growing up in the country teaches you to get on with people, because you don't have the luxury of hanging out with people like you hang out with everybody and you're part of a community. So I think liking people, wanting to understand people, and I think having cancer has made me care not very much about what people think of me. And I think that's one of my superpowers is I don't really care what you think of me. If I like you, I like people to like me, but
literally it's not going to kill me if you don't.
It's literally not going to kill me. And I mean, I had a conversation with a colleague the other day. We walked into a room to have a meeting and sat down. I said, "How are you going?" And he said, "How are you?" I said, "Awesome." He said, "Why?" I said, "I don't know, like no one's dead."
I'm alive. My kids are all alive.
And he laughed and said, "You have a bit of a different perspective." I said, "Yeah, I do." So I think having that perspective, I think generally us humans get this perspective as we age, but if you have serious illness early in life and hard things in your family, you get a real perspective on what's important in life, and it teaches you to not care what people think of you and to be really authentic. And I think when you do those things, leading people it's easier to lead people when you're truly authentic and you're not trying to be somebody else, you're just being you. And I think having been through difficult things makes you a more empathetic leader as well.
What other advice? So people who look at you and say, wow, I'd love to be even half as productive as Jodie is. I'd love to achieve, because not only do you have your job and you're a parent and you sit on the board of
Australian Military Bank.
Yes, and then also do some other not-for-profit work. What would you say to people when they ask you, how do you do it all, in terms of these are some good tips that help me get the most out of my day and go to meetings and feel awesome?
That's a good question. I think that I focus a lot on what's important and I don't waste my time on things that are not.
And you've just got a good natural barometer for what's important and what's not.
I do, and I think that if you're in a leadership role, having people around you that are good at things that you're not good at and giving power to that, all power to them. I've got people in my team who are the smartest people I've ever worked with and think about things in a really different way to me. I bring the people dimension to things. I'm a really good dot connector of themes and things that I see out in the market. But building a team that together is powerful. It's not just about you. And I think that's a big learning for me over the last few years is how can I empower my team to be really successful themselves and drive us all forward. So I think finding people and letting them play to their strengths, and that allows you to play to your strengths as well. So I don't spend time doing things I'm not good at very often, and that's better for everybody. So I think focus, I think not taking things too seriously, keep things in perspective. I have to say though, Catherine, I always have had big goals and big ambitions, but I've had a very busy life and a very productive life, and I say to people now, I kind of just want to watch TV more. That's one of my ambitions, is not to do so much. Actually, my example is kind of going against that. So I'm learning to become a meditation teacher at the moment. So I'm doing another thing, but it's to do less.
You're a prolific reader, and I'm sure, in your sort of role, keeping up with investment markets is endless. And I know you read the Australian Financial Review every day. What other books, if I can, finance, but I know you read non-finance books as well. What are your favourite finance books and any other non-finance books that you would recommend?
Oh, gosh. Finance books. I actually haven't read finance books for years. I have read finance books. You looked shocked then. I've read lots of finance books. So I did a degree in commerce and economics, and then I got my chartered financial analyst. So I've read
which is impressive because you obviously didn't fail any CFA units because you got it straight through.
I did not fail. I'm good at studying.
Because what's the fail rate for CFA?
Oh, it's quite high.
It's like 70% or something.
I can't remember.
Anyway,
I was very young. But
I looked at that and I was very impressed.
Oh, thank you. I've read all of the textbooks. So I find that I haven't read a lot of finance books later in my life because I did so much of it early on. So I tend to read more blogs, newspapers and things like that. So I do read the AFR. I read The Economist online. Most of the more interesting sort of non-fiction books that I read are around performance and those sorts of things. So I remember my aunt giving me Dale Carnegie's How to Make Friends and Influence People when I was at the tender age of probably 12 or 13. And I got this book and was like, what are you trying to say? I have friends. I didn't understand why she'd given it to me, but I read it. And I've actually taken, I have... one of my kids is quite shy, and I always say to her, just ask questions. People love to talk about themselves. So I've actually taken stuff from that book, for example, from a long time ago, but I tend to read things more around people and performance and leadership than I do about finance. I've read way too many finance things.
And any fiction books or others that or as you say, blogs or anything that you particularly love to dip into?
So I get an email twice a week. Oh, I'll have to look it up and give you the link. Maria Popova, I think it's called. It's a really interesting way of looking at the world. It's almost philosophy.
An Australian, American?
I think it's American. I'll give you the link. I'll look it up. It really makes you think quite differently about things because I do have an interest in neuroscience, wellness, meditation, that kind of stuff. So it's more philosophy than anything else. So I really like that. I read a lot of fiction as well, so a lot of Australian literature. I really like Indian writers, so The God of Small Things, Jhumpa Lahiri's got a few books that I really like. Yeah, I actually read quite a lot. I like reading. It's nice downtime.
So final question, when you look into the future, what are the things that you're really positive and optimistic about?
I am positive and optimistic about the level of engagement that I think the younger generation are having in the world around them. I think, I'm most certainly Generation X, and I think perhaps we're just tired and in that phase of tired life where your parents are ageing, your kids are young, you're working hard and probably at the peak of your career, and you're just a bit tired. Whereas I see, even in our office, I see the young starters and they're really educated and interested in climate change, around gender issues, around the Me Too movement, and I'm really inspired by them, and they actually make me try harder to make sure that I stay educated, because I was across social issues a few 10 years ago, but with kids and that you just get a little bit introspective, I think. So staying wide open to the world and learning from what the young people have to offer, I find really, really exciting.
And I hope for that generation, and I've heard you say this, that that they fully benefit from being young and they don't make some of the mistakes that some of our generation have made and get weighed down by huge debts on things that are not productive, so cars and clothes and phones and sometimes houses.
Yeah.
And they start engaging with their financial life as early as they can.
Compound interest. It's all about that compound interest.
Absolutely. But I think, having the financial security to be able to do great things, it's one thing to have great ideas, but if you're burdened in whatever way and you're not at liberty to go and fully explore the world, I think exemplified in you to the extent that here you are creating financial independence in the work that you do and bringing life to that in a whole lot of other ways as well.
I think the young people of today seem far more sensible with their money than I ever was at their age. So I hope, and they're looking at things like very expensive housing in Sydney and Melbourne, for example. Like they are having to think about it earlier than we were. So I think to the extent that people get educated on finance, because financial literacy is still very, very, very low. Get yourself educated. It's really easy to go on a few websites and learn what you need to know. Make sensible decisions. Really sensible little decisions really add up over the long term.
It's brilliant to spend time with you. Thanks so much for generously sharing your story.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.
Every week I find a nugget of gold in each discussion, something I want to take away and implement in my own life. If you feel the same, I'd love to know how my guests touch your lives. You can leave a review on iTunes or get in touch on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thanks to the awesome Buffy Gorilla for production, Alicia Piper for her fantastic writing, and to Broke Free, who wrote and performed our theme music. See you next week.